It's now my great pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Stan Litow, who is IBM's Vice President for Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs and also President of the IBM International Foundation. I also want to thank Reg Foster, who is on the board of the BBB's Foundation, for helping us make the connection and bringing you here. Stan Litow is so distinguished and his resume is so loaded with accomplishments that I couldn't possibly list them all right now, but just to hit on some highlights. Mr. Litow leads IBM's corporate responsibility efforts in over 170 countries. Under his leadership, IBM has developed many innovations that serve the public good, such as voice recognition technology that can help children and adults to learn reading skills. He conceived Reinventing Education, a program serving over 100,000 teachers and 10 million children globally. So it won't surprise you to learn that he was Deputy Chancellor of Schools for New York City before he came to IBM. Stan is the recipient of many awards, and I encourage you to look at his bio to see just how many there are. He currently chairs the Global Leadership Network, and he serves on the boards of leading organizations such as the Independent Sector and Harvard Business School's Social Enterprise Initiative, among others. So now I'm delighted to introduce Stan Litow, who will share his thoughts with us about how leaders can restore shattered trust in business and lead the way to recovery. Stan?
Okay, we're going to lead the way to recovery. Thank you very much for that generous and kind introduction, and I would like to one more time acknowledge two of my colleagues from IBM who are in the room, Reg Foster and Pam Haas, who represent us very, very well in New York City and New York State and in these environs. I am born and raised in New York City. I got myself a visa to work at corporate headquarters in Westchester, but love an opportunity to come back into New York to talk to a New York crowd and about corporate social responsibility, which is something that I'm very involved in from the business standpoint, but something that I think I had a lot of engagement with in a variety of other careers. I started off working for the mayor in New York City, and obviously from the standpoint of making a city smarter and more effective, relationships with the business community is critically important, and business responsibility is critically important from a municipality standpoint. I also was a gubernatorial appointee in a couple of different ways, and obviously business responsibility is very, very important from state standpoint. In my tenure as Deputy Chancellor of Schools, obviously, and you know this, many of the people in the room know how engaged you are with education, K-12 in New York City or in other cities, so business behavior is critically important there. So whether we're talking about from the public sector at a national governmental level or a state governmental level or a local governmental level, or from a non-governmental standpoint, the voluntary sector, and from companies, everybody would like there to be a higher level of corporate social responsibility. That's a goal, I think, that is shared across the sectors. And it's not unique to the United States. I mean, when earlier on in the introduction somebody talked about lack of trust in the business community in the U.S., this is not a U.S. issue. This is sort of a global issue. So corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility is something that all sectors of the economy care a lot about, and it's something that people care a lot about whatever is your address, whether it's local here in New York City or in New York State, someplace else in the United States or in any other place in the world. But people don't understand it all that well. It's a relatively new thing, and for some people it gets mixed up in a lot of things that they recall or remember from the past with regard to corporate behavior. So a lot of people think that corporate social responsibility is purely about philanthropy. And the seeds of philanthropy in the U.S. go back to, the great, industrial giants in the 20th century who ran their businesses as best as they thought they could without much time thinking about business's responsibility to society. But then when they made a lot of money, very often they gave a good deal of it away through either personal philanthropies or other private philanthropic institutions that they set up. So this business about philanthropy or corporate philanthropy started off with individuals. And in many ways, while the individual philanthropists were committed to social issues, whether it was the Rockefellers in education or Carnegie in libraries, some part of it was to restore a reputation, a personal reputation, attached to their business that had to do with pretty rigorous and difficult business behavior where somebody thought they needed to do something to cushion that on the way out. And that was the tradition of more personal philanthropy. So it wasn't really about the business. It wasn't about the business behavior. The idea was make as much money as you can in whatever way you can. Obviously, you don't want to break the law, but with whatever business practices you think are the most effective for you. And then at the end of the day, relative to a personal philanthropy, you can make donations. That transitioned into the 60s and 70s into the beginnings of corporate philanthropy, that it was important to give something back. It wasn't about how the business operated. It wasn't about business standards. It wasn't about labor practices. It wasn't about environmental concerns. It was the idea that if you made a certain amount of money, you had a responsibility to give something back. And there even developed the beginnings of standards for that. Well, you should give back 1% of NEBT, or you should give up more than 1% of NEBT, or if you didn't scale 1%, that was evidence that you weren't doing enough. So corporate philanthropy wasn't about, what you did, not the beginning part of it at any rate, but just the idea that people owed something back, and it was about generosity. And of course, when we went through business upturns or business downturns, we saw people doing a little bit more of it or a little bit less of it, but it was really about the philanthropic end. Now, that's not to say that government didn't develop standards for people in other areas around labor practices or around environmental practices or financial transparency or other things, but they tended to be a little disconnected from one another. Into the early 90s, we began to see the first beginning of an understanding or awakening about the interlocking nature of many of these issues. If you are a global company and you did business in Europe, you found the European Union awakening in the 1990s very much to the area of corporate social responsibility and recommending and suggesting certain levels of corporate behavior that would be a requirement if you bid on contracts in European geographies, and that it was a responsibility that corporations had to deliver a yearly corporate social responsibility report, and that set some kind of standard for your activities year to year. And then in the latter part of the 1990s, many of the companies in the room saw agitation at shareholder meetings about the requirement of having a corporate social responsibility report. At the same time, we also saw many companies trying to focus or sharpen their philanthropic activities so that what they were doing was more germane to what their business was. So it wasn't uncommon for a company that was involved in information or in communications to focus on things about education or literacy. And it wasn't uncommon for consumer products companies to try to attract a particular population that was the core where they sold their products or services. And that was all evident of a change in the way people understood corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility. Towards this century, the 21st century, right in the middle of it, we're, I think, in the midst of another change. And people are now starting to see corporate social responsibility as something that is a little bit more mature and a little bit more important. But I would say up until now, they're thinking of it more on the risk side. Why you do corporate social responsibility, or why you develop behaviors that are significant and important in these areas, is about mitigating risk. Environmental performance, to make sure that your company, your brand, your shareholders are not exposed to risk. And that's why you get involved in the range of environmental issues that demonstrate good corporate citizenship in the environment. In terms of labor practices, the same is true. You don't want to have a workplace that exposes your employees to difficult challenges, because there's a risk from the standpoint of regulation and legislation in behaving in a way that is unfair or unjust towards your employee base. Financial transparency is also about risk mitigation, and as are many of the other issues under the CSR umbrella. But I think what we're beginning to see is an opportunity for people to look not only at corporate social responsibility from the standpoint of mitigating risk, but beginning to see it as an opportunity to maximize reward. And the most visible evidence of that is the growth of socially responsible investment funds. Depending upon whose analysis you believe, there is either a minimum of $1 trillion and perhaps a whole lot more that's available in socially responsible investment funds. Their tradition had been to screen out investment in companies that were bad in the area of CSR. So they make decisions not to invest in certain companies that had bad behavior in the area of CSR, either significant amount of risk or involved in products that had downside risk to the particular users. It might have been alcohol, or it might have been tobacco, or it might have been certain people who are involved in some aspects of the energy business. But now we're beginning to see that socially responsible investment funds are looking at stable, attractive, solid companies that also have a good track record in CSR, and positioning themselves to become investors in those companies that balance good business performance with good social performance. And if that's the case, and that's $1 trillion or more than $1 trillion worth of target, and your company is a good financial performer, but also a good CSR performer, what might you see as a reasonable return from advancing that to socially responsible investment funds? Could you get them to buy $50 million more of your stock, 80 million, 100 million, or more? That begins to configure corporate social responsibility not only as mitigating risk, but as maximizing financial reward. The current economic downturn notwithstanding, we began to see evidence that when the best talent coming out of business schools, computer science schools, and others, much prized by companies that are in a war for talent and trying to attract the absolute best people, found that in many ways, good, strong corporate social responsibility programs are a way to attract the best talent and keep the best talent, because given an option, and there are still people who have options as to where they would exercise their talent, people would like to work with a company or for a company that has a strong track record in social responsibility. They understand that CSR is really at the intersection between business and society. It can produce business benefit. Without it, you can expose your brand and your shareholders to unnecessary risk. And CSR is something that is very, very important to practice and practice well. And I would suggest that at this particular point in time, where the United States government is spending about $800 billion in stimulus spending in a variety of ways that corporations might be interested in, and the 20 largest companies, geographies around the world are spending over $3 trillion in stimulus spending when you add China and European geographies, Latin American geographies, the United States, and others all together. Those dollars are going to go through what are largely competitive bidding systems that governments have set up, and corporate social responsibility and social behavior is going to be more important, not less important. And companies that have a strong track record are going to find themselves eligible and available to get those resources, and those that don't, just like not having the right infrastructure and not having the right talent, you're not going to be in the best situation to avail yourself of those resources. And as government reacts against the bad business behavior that we heard a little bit about in the introduction, the best antidote to further negative regulation or legislation, the best antidote towards it is good corporate behavior, real social responsibility. And that's not to say that corporations can, in and of themselves and by themselves, resolve social problems all by themselves. You know, let's take the area of K-12 education. As you heard in the introduction, you know, I used to be Deputy Chancellor of Schools here in New York. In the United States as a whole, we spend about $800 billion on K-12 education. And all of the corporate contributions amount to less than 1% of the spending. So if somebody were looking at the education issue and said, well, why doesn't the corporate community become more responsible and help solve America's crisis in K-12 education, you're certainly not going to do it with 1% of the dollars. You're certainly not going to do it in a sector of the economy that doesn't hire teachers, doesn't train teachers, doesn't build schools, doesn't test students, doesn't promote them, and doesn't manage the K-12 enterprise. And the same would be true of every societal problem, whether it's K-12 education or the environment or health care or labor issues or broader kind of community issues. Businesses play a role and need to be socially responsible, but every sector of the society needs to maintain its role in social responsibility. The voluntary sector isn't about sitting back and demanding corporate behavior. It's in participating with the private sector to achieve it. The public sector isn't about revising regulations about what companies should do, but becoming a full partner with companies in being able to advance high-quality behavior. And we don't have a lot of common ground between the various sectors of the economy where we really understand that. For the people in the room who represent the corporate sector and meet with people in a variety of other areas in the economy, public or voluntary, very often people shake their head. They really don't understand what businesses are all about. The same is true about the public sector, not feeling that business understands their problems, and the same is true of the voluntary sector. I've worked in all three sectors of the economy. I work for not-for-profit organizations. I've worked for government at a variety of levels, and I work in the business community. I can tell you that each sector thinks the other doesn't understand their problems, doesn't appreciate their challenges, and wishes there was some way to achieve a larger and greater level of understanding. I think that's an important goal. Now, let me tell you a little bit about IBM's perspective about corporate social responsibility, and then I'm going to save time for questions. I was told to speak for no more than 25 minutes. I'm going to try to stick to my allotted time. From the standpoint of corporate social responsibility, number one, we like to think of ourselves as a innovation and technology company. If you've seen our advertisements, they're about building a smarter planet, making our cities smarter, and using the best innovation and the best technology with our clients, with our customers, to be able to achieve that. That's no different than the way in which we would behave with communities in the area of community interaction. We would take a look at what are the most innovative technologies that are coming out of the IBM Research Lab, what are the critical issues that weigh heavily on communities, and can we develop in our research laboratories the kind of solutions like we would for our clients to do the exact same job in the community. So as mentioned in the introduction, voice recognition technology. You see it and feel it in every endeavor in human life. You pick up the telephone and they're recognizing your voice, and you don't actually have to talk to somebody. You turn the ignition key in your car, and they recognize your voice. We've got voice recognition technology in refrigerators that tell you when it's time to buy more milk or go to the store and buy more consumable supplies. Voice recognition technology is a very interesting and a powerful piece of technology. It's embedded in many pieces of technology. But we took it, and our researchers and some of the best literacy teachers that we could find, and we actually developed a way to use voice recognition technology over the web to help a non-literate child and adult learn how to read. And much as we would do when we would develop a product, we beta tested it, we expanded its use across a variety of different states and cities, across a variety of different countries. We brought down the cost of it to close to zero and got us to the point where we can donate it, hopefully to serve millions and millions of non-literate children and adults in learning how to read. So what's the benefit to the community? We're addressing a critical problem, literacy, connected to jobs and social growth, connected to economic stability. And what's the benefit to the IBM company? The benefit is that as we mature the use of voice recognition technology, we advance our products. We give ourselves new patents. We improve our intellectual capability and our intellectual property. Second, as we roll it out in communities around the United States and around the world, we learn business process consulting in very difficult environments. I don't think there's a more difficult customer than a school principal or a school to work with, or a more difficult or challenging public sector bureaucracy. And this is not just a U.S. issue, and I can say this because I've been there. It's difficult to negotiate with, difficult to work with. You build your technical capability, you build your talent capability, and then you are able to leverage that throughout the business. That's one example. I'll give you a second. Grid technology. This is what allows you to harness the computational power of an individual PC. We see one there in the room. Right now, the individual who's working on a PC is using about 20% of all the computational power on that PC. And when he's not typing, it's there 100%, and it's not going anywhere. That computing power can be harnessed and contributed or donated for a social purpose. So we created something called World Community Grid. You can go to worldcommunitygrid.org, and then every time you're not using your computer, all of the power on it goes onto the grid and can be contributed. It's now working on a very important childhood cancer project to try to find a cure for neuroblastoma, working with a research institute in Japan, the Chiba Institute. We just recently announced a study on H1N1, the swine flu virus, with the University of Texas at Austin. And they're using the power of the grid, 1.2 million individual PCs that collectively represent one of the largest and most powerful virtual supercomputers in the world to be able to tackle the issue of swine flu. And it can work on muscular dystrophy research, and it can work on developing a better and more effective strain of rice to address the world hunger crisis. But what is the social problem? Healthcare research, environmental research, lacking money. I'm sure you hear from a lot of people who would like money for research, and it's too rich for your pocketbook. And the federal government, which supports a lot of research, doesn't do enough. And people would love to have millions of dollars to buy their own supercomputers. World Community Grid can give them access to free computing power, most powerful supercomputing power available on the planet, and it can give it to them for nothing, simply because hundreds of thousands or millions of people will contribute. Again, what's the benefit to the community? Breakthrough in cancer research, breakthrough in AIDS research, a new climate model for Africa, a stronger strain of rice, more effective solar cells to bring down the cost and the effectiveness of solar technology. Great contribution to the community. What's the benefit to IBM? We demonstrate that grid technology is safe. It doesn't hurt your computer. It doesn't threaten your data systems. It's something that individuals can participate, companies can participate in, and the people who use it become more familiar with the technology, and it's more usable and more adaptable in the community. Those are two examples of a way in which innovative technology coupled with the best talent can solve a social problem, creating good in the community, but also create benefit for the company. What are the benefits to IBM of its corporate social responsibility effort? Number one, it offers us greater innovation capability, and it builds the products and the intellectual capital that we offer to our customers. Second, we engage our employees in this work, and they learn skills that they don't necessarily learn as well on the job, but that they can use on the job. We have 130,000 employees who are engaged in ongoing community service activities, and what they do is work in communities with a range of online tools that help them become more effective, and it hones their consulting skills and their business skills, and that's an important opportunity. Third, it builds your brand. We received last year more media attention for IBM corporate social responsibility programs than any product or service that we sell in the business. So it is definitely something that can strengthen your brand, and I believe in advertising, but that's not something that you have to pay for. Fourth, it is an attraction strategy to build and attract the best workforce, and a retention strategy to keep them. We started a program called the Corporate Service Corps. We like to refer to it as an IBM corporate version of the Peace Corps, where over the next 3 years, we will take 1,500 of the absolute best and brightest IBM employees and executives and give them an opportunity to work in teams in the developing world in places like Ghana, Tanzania, Romania, Vietnam, India, China, and work together, live together, solve a problem, working on the ground for an NGO, usually at the nexus between economic development and economic growth and technology, and it builds their leadership capability so that when the company looks at developing markets and looks at the opportunity to grow their business in geographies that are nascent at this point, you're building the capability of your best talent to be able to understand those problems. And it's much less expensive than long-term international assignments, and it's geared for emerging leaders, not people at the end of their career. We have gotten great benefit out of that program. That's another example of clear benefit. So whether you're going to measure it at the number of socially responsible investment funds who buy your stock, the intellectual growth and capability, the brand value, the public relations capability, building your skills, we have done our own internal assessment, and we believe the return on investment is $3 for every $1 that's invested. And we think that metrics are critically important. And if you're going to look at corporate social responsibility, you ought to do it to mitigate risk. You ought to do it to prevent bad things from happening. You ought to do it to maintain the importance of your brand, especially in these difficult times. But you also ought to do it because you expect a return on your investment. You know, people talk about, you know, why business should be giving anything away. And people always point to the phrase, the business of business is business. And you shouldn't worry about society, or you shouldn't worry about social responsibility. But if the business of business is business, how do you build an effective business? Can you possibly build an effective business if your shareholders are exposed to risk? Could you build an effective business if you can't recruit the best talent? Is your business going to be the best business focused on business if you can't retain the best talent? If you disregard $1 trillion worth of socially responsible investment funds and say, we're not interested in that, we're going to go for traditional investors? Well, look, obviously not. So if the business of business is business, and business ought to be an effective business and a competitive business, well, social responsibility is critically important. Now, there are some people who are saying to themselves, well, that's fine in good economic times, but these are challenging economic times. And, you know, we can't sustain an investment in challenging economic times. Well, the portion of your business that is investing in things that are producing return are being sustained. So it's a question of how you organize it. What's your measurement system? What are the rubrics and metrics to be able to measure performance? How do you scale the return on investment? How do you organize to deliver it? Because for big companies, and we're certainly a big company, $100 billion, 400,000 employees, doing business in 170 different countries. We're nearly 100 years old, so it's a very large and a very complicated business, and corporate social responsibility is not often in one place. It's scattered throughout the company. So how do you make it effective? You need a management system to run it. You need to have your people exposed to HR issues, environmental issues, healthcare issues, transparency questions. You can do it through social reporting, but from a management standpoint, it has to be part of the matrix management system that a business sets up. And it can't not, to be effective, it must flow from the CEO on down, from the board and the CEO on down. Everybody has to buy into the importance of this as a critical component of building an effective business. Now, I've been at IBM through 2 CEOs, and one of the things that I learned in the private sector, somewhat different from the public sector, is that unless we're talking about a total turnaround situation, when one CEO leaves and another comes in, the things that are measured and effective maintain the CEO's commitment, the new CEO's commitment. Change happens in those areas that are not effective. Somewhat different from the public sector, where when the mayor, the governor, or the president goes, everything goes, right? And that's the advantage that the private sector has. So I have seen continued commitment, continued investment, and real measurable return in the area of corporate social responsibility. It's good for the IBM company. It's good for the constituencies that we care about. It's good for our clients. It's good for our employees. It's good for our shareholders. and it's good for communities, because it's in communities where all those other constituencies come together. It's in communities where the media covers you. It's in communities where elected officials are. It's in communities where your clients live, work, and participate. So it's vitally important. We're committed to building on what we think is a good track record of performance. CRO magazine looked at the Russell 1000. They ranked companies. They ranked us number 3. We're delighted to be ahead of 997 other companies, but that gives us 3 more slots to move up. And every company also gets judged by the quality of others. Remember the Enron difficulties? Did that stick onto how people thought about other companies, or WorldCom? Didn't that stick in how people view the private sector? And isn't the current difficulty, I mean, you can't walk down the street and pretend that people don't think about the bad corporate behavior from some as something that is larger issue for many, many other companies. So we're all going to be judged by each other's performance. And there's a lot that we can do by working together collectively to improve that standard of performance. The business of business is business. To be an effective business, you need to treat corporate social responsibility seriously. And if you do, there's a significant return on your investment. Thank you very much. Okay, I have to read these cards quickly. How are you building CSR transparency efforts into IBM's global operations and drawing together your communications about it? In terms of, we issue a annual corporate responsibility report. We issue it according to Global Reporting Initiative standards. It's available in print form, in a summary, and electronically on our site. In terms of communications, we have merged 3 departments at IBM together: citizenship, communications, and marketing. And many of the people who work with me and for me in my organization have responsibilities that move over into the communications and marketing end. And the same is true of the marketing and communications team, so we're joined at the hip. Next question. At a time when companies are struggling, do you think we can find incentives to encourage those companies to engage in social responsibility? Yes, I think the incentives are in front of us. They're economic return for the company in the variety of different ways that I've identified, and they're in preventing the bad things from happening. If we just look at the over $3 trillion worth of stimulus spending that's going to be handed out by government, does anybody think that those contracts at some point aren't going to be audited? Does anybody think that there's not going to be standards that people are going to develop in the governments around the United States and around the world? Do you turn the TV on? Do you know how people are waiting to find abuse? So yeah, I think there are incentives, and I think it's time to get with the program. What is the interface between the IBM Foundation and IBM Corporate Responsibility and CSR? The IBM Foundation is the entity that we use to deliver cash grants. That's a relatively small part of what we do. Most of what we do is to contribute innovation, technology, and talent from the company, about $170 million a year. About 40% of it is outside the U.S., and about a significant part of that outside the U.S. is devoted to markets in the developing world. So the foundation is integrated into the strategy to be a good corporate citizen. How does a small company access funding for CSR from the available $1 trillion? I think you actively go after it in the same way you would actively go after investors for your business as a whole. We do quarterly calls with socially responsible investment funds. We produce information for them and for the IT analyst community. I don't think it's different from the information that you use to manage your business. There may be smaller enterprises that can't do it on the same scale. That's absolutely true. But they're not necessarily expecting the same kind of return as we are. So I think it is something that people could advance, and I think the benefits are out there. And the last question, where are you finding the talent to develop further run CSR programs, new, retrained, what training? Well, actually, we spent a lot of time on figuring out the best ways to train the people who work in our organization, but the more, and that's about 100 people out of 400,000, that's not the training question. The question is, how does it embed itself in the training for new executives, training of people who get moved up to become members of the IBM senior leadership group, that's the integration and values team, and it is becoming an integral part of CSR is becoming an integral part of how you train employees at every level to be a global IBMer. And also how you use that training to realize economic return. We're going to be launching an intranet site for our company. We're calling it Corporate Citizenship Central. That's going to have for IBMers around the world everything that they would need to be able to convert and get economic benefit out of IBM's CSR program. And that's another first, and we think it's going to be a real winner for the company. Time's up. Thank you very much.